blocked and harassed country. This global challenge is not only for Venezuela, but for the countries as a whole. Therefore, they need to have financial sustainable measures and sustainable means that beyond the fact that they are appropriate for the environment, can't be they can anticipate risks in every productive activity, and they can handle the impact, meaning the costs of those impacts on activities and specific actions in the financial field. The vacuum that we are confronting under this blockade is that we have a hole between the economic losses that we cannot ensure of the total of economic losses resulting from a climate disaster, or between climate impact and the resiliency measures that we were able or not to put in place in a given country. In 2015, after many debates and very strong debate between developed and developing countries, but especially among the island states, finally they recognized the creation of an international mechanism for losses and damages. That international mechanism should reduce the minimum of the effects of extreme events and address a topic which is clear for island states, the displacement due to climate events. So not only developed countries recognize this mechanism together with developing countries, but also developed countries also introduced a text stating that that mechanism will not recognize any legal responsibility on damages caused or generate any type of indemnification for any damage. So this text killed the very purpose of the proposal that was introduced. What do we talk? Why do we talk about to the greening of capitalism and the triumph of this ambiguous capitalism? The crisis of capitalism has become a crisis of civilization. The consequences on the environment constitute a threat, as Fidel said, they threaten the survival of human race, of humanity as a whole. The spoliation of the South have become institutionalized in adjustment structural plans that, based on the Paris Agreement, are being introduced and restored, and in the ecological restoration for the economy of the world. The restoration, ecological process of the global economy. What do we mean by this? That those who destructed the planet, those responsible for the climate situation that we are facing today, they have created a narrative enabling them not only to excuse and exculpate themselves for the historical responsibility for the destruction of the planet, but also they have rewritten the principles of good and evil regarding the ecology, and they have started to talk of what we mean the ecological transition. Europe, just to give you an example, has created and adopted at the beginning of this year the Green Pact, the Green Deal. And they give for, they consider they're going to neutralize emission by substituting fossil energies by renewable energies. The goal is to become a, a net, net zero region in 2050. To that end, they have mobilized $750 billion to inject money in the economies with funds whose title is very cynical, namely the next generation. After destroying the whole world, they are trying to destroy the future. These funds clearly state that they will only be used for the medium and large companies. Today, various companies, the most polluting companies, are receiving funds from these next generation funds. Now, the Green Deal in Europe is premised on a number of raw materials, 63 raw materials, plus three group of raw materials named raw materials, and they include platinum and all the family of platinum, heavy rare materials, and light rare materials, namely more than 78 rare materials. We find lithium, cobalt, nickel, titanium, bauxite, boron, phosphorus, natural rubber, iridium, rhodium, and so on. The European Union does not produce not even 2% of those raw materials. However, they consume 20% of the global production. The main suppliers of those materials in the planet are China, 98%, Turkey, 98%, South Africa, 71%, Kazakhstan, 61%, and I will continue the list, but the plan, the cynicism explains itself. There is, there is no green transformation or green transition. The European plan is premised on the extraction of these resources, is an anti-ecological extraction process, and the European plan includes the compliance of the zero net emissions for 2050, establishing carbon market through which they can exchange the emission rights to purchase them to poor countries that do not emit these pollutants. This package comes with another element already mentioned by Miguel, who for a long time has been an ally with us, namely the green protectionism, namely barriers to products and services coming from developing countries and the export of industrial products and the promotion of products coming from developed countries, the prohibition of subsidies in areas which are not established or considered green or good or ecological according to the criteria of industrialized countries will be penalized. They're going to receive custom fees and also adjustments in the borders of the prices. It is therefore impossible, based on this context, to defend or to adjust economically to this under a blockade. The green economy, therefore, that we consider rather a green capitalism, becomes an oppressive mechanism. It is the most savage capitalism that is disguised, limiting the economic capacity of the highly dependent economies of agriculture and fossil energies. It blocks the access to a productive market with goods and services that are not in agreement with the Northern Plan, and they do not receive financing if they do not comply the green requirements of the global banking. Capitalism will never be social or human capitalism, no matter the color you paint it with. The only alternative is a new art of living, the one raised by ALBA-TCP as a flag since 2009 through Hugo Chavez, Evo Morales, as a political guidance, the good life or the good living. So socialism or barbarism is no longer a slogan.
Socialism or barbarism is not only advice. We need, as ALBA-TCP, and with our own voice, the only alternative voice that is still alive in that negotiation process, which has been invaded by the capitalism interests. We need to stop this determinism in economy of an eternal growth, but also we needed to revise profoundly that will enable us as a society to transform our needs, because that is a debate that is not occurring sufficiently today. I do not talk negatively about oil because I don't believe that nothing that's been created by God is evil per se. Oil is not evil. What is evil is the use that we make of it and the decisions of its utilization. And I believe that after all this year, after the Paris Agreement, we never defended it as the best agreement of the world, but it was the best thing we could obtain with the participation of almost 200 countries and with the agreement of the vast majority of the international community after 7 years of intense negotiations. Is an agreement that we can perfect using new rules, and we need to continue raising the flag because this battle is not over, because it is not totally lost yet, and this is a cause that uh, well, we need to defend with our lives, and one cause that is worth it winning. It's the only possible socialism, as President Chavez said, is eco-socialism, and I continue to believe in eco-socialism. Thank you very much. Thank you, Claudia Salermo. Well, she has made a brilliant presentation. It is also the continuation of what Diego was saying, which is a critique against the green economy or the green capitalism. And she has explained the European policies implemented today. She started her presentation talking about the Paris Agreement and the three main components of that agreement. All countries have a responsibility in terms of mitigation and adaptation, and all countries have responsibilities in terms of their national determined contributions and the technology and also the financing that needs to come from the developed countries to the rest of the world. All of these aspects and challenges that are there in the Paris Agreement require financing and require as well uh, free access to that financing. And all these challenges are endangered by the UCMs, uh, which have a negative impact. And then we see what's happening in Europe. Uh, Claudia has told us about the pretension of imposing green policies by Europe towards a green transition, but they are creating resources for a series of companies that are, so to speak, engaged in that transition. But these companies continue to pollute, and they require resources that are not produced in Europe. And here we can see how colonialism is operating. They want to extract or continue extracting resources from the global south with the conditions that they themselves impose. And only the countries who will abide by the capitalism interests will enter the game. So Claudia is making important criticism of those green policies, but which are really capitalist policies, which are based on extractivism and want to impose their vision to the rest of the world. And she closed with one quotation of Rosa de Luxemburg, socialism or barbarism. The socialism is the way in which we can reach a better world. Thank you very much, Claudia, for being here with us. Thank you for your contribution and your ideas. And let's continue with our friend Ramon Pitt. Ramon Pitt, he has a degree of foreign trade from the Havana University in 1985. He has a master's studies on social sciences and PhD in economic sciences from the Mexican University. 98. He is a researcher of the World Economy Center ever since 1986, and since 2003, he is leading this center. He's the director. He is also a member of the Science Academy of Cuba since 2012 till 2024. Well, he will be re-elected, I guess, and he's member of the IPCC ever since 97. He has published five books and numerous articles on energy, environment, and development. Ramon is a professor of the economy faculty of the Havana University since 2004, and he has received some awards, among them the Alfonso Cano Medal granted by the Autonomous University in Mexico in 2004, the Carlos J. Finley Order granted by Cuba in 2010, and 2011 he received the Lázaro Peña Order in its first class granted by the Republic of Cuba for his academic endeavors. So welcome Ramon P. to our meeting, and I give you the floor. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizers of this conference. I believe that talking about unilateral coercive measures and their impact on the ability to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, it's a very timely given the current circumstances where there are preparations for COP26. It is a pleasure for me to share my presentation to share also with other specialists who have participated in the international negotiation processes on climate change and development. Diego and Claudia, it's an honor to share with you today's panel. I am not going to talk about the global issues on climate change as a challenge for development. It is a challenge, and Diego and Claudia have already talked about this topic, and they have explained very well of this field. But what I'll do is I will talk about the U.S. blockade against Cuba as the main obstacle to the social economic development and national actions to respond to climate change, which confirm many of the assertions made by Claudia and Diego when they talked about this problem. First of all, I would like to remind you that we are talking about a policy, coercive unilateral policy, and 70% of Cubans have been born under the effects of this blockade. So we're talking about more than a policy, we're talking about a system of measures which is the most comprehensive in the world with the purpose of trying to exert more pressure on the Cuban government and harming the whole population. In the current circumstances, we have experienced 7 decades as the blockade continues to be the central axis of the U.S. government. It's the longest and most comprehensive system of natural coercive measures in history, which constitutes the main obstacle to the social economic development of the country. And it is also an obstacle for all the climate events in our country and for the cooperation actions that Cuba can carry out with other countries in order to improve its capability or response to the climate change. And there has been an opportunistic resurgence of the blockade in periods of greater vulnerability of our country. And I believe that this is what we have seen during the special period and also in the framework of the COVID-19 pandemic. They see these kinds of situations to intensify the blockade in order to reach their goals, which we will explain later on. This blockade, it's a policy that impedes Cuba's access to the main international financial institutions. And during the current U.S. administration, even though there were a lot of expectancies um, in terms of what could happen or the prospect of them lifting the measures or easing in them, what we have seen is that the system of unilateral coercive measures against Cuba has remained intact. And so they have taken advantage of the socioeconomic deterioration generated by the pandemic to generate greater shortages of food and other basic resources, and from there to promote social instability in the country that will lead to the throwing of the Cuban project. And I would like to remind you of this a sentence that was written just before the blockade started. It is a secret memorandum from the U.S. Department of State signed by Lester Mayuri, the Deputy Secretary of State, Assistant for American Affairs, where when he said, the majority of Cubans support Castro. The only foreseeable way to undermine his internal support is through disenchantment and dissatisfaction arising from economic malaise and material difficulties. All possible means must be quickly employed to awaken Cuba's economic life. A line of action which, being as skillful and discreet as possible, will achieve the greatest progress in depriving Cuba of money and supplies to reduce its financial resources and salary. So this objective has been imposed over the six decades where they have strengthened blockade against Cuba, a blockade that uh, has severely impacted our country of a very high loss of billions of dollars. And well, the costs and harms are not only reduced to this 147,000 billion dollars. It's clear that in the previous administration, the administration, Donald Trump's administration, the blockade was reinforced with the application of 243 unilateral coercive measures were applied against Cuba, 55 of them only in 2020. And the blockade was applied in a systematic and intentional manner. They included Cuba on the list of state sponsors of terrorism in January 2021 when Trump left his presidency, and it has had new deterrent and intimidating effects, which have led to greater difficulties for international economic activities, commercial and financial, including those related to the command of the pandemic. And also the activation of Title III of the Helms-Burton Act, which questions the legitimacy of the nationalizations of the 1960s Cuba, and 34 judicial processes are enforced. The vast majority of them are enforced, and they are effects of foreign direct investments, preventing foreign investment. And also medical, scientific, educational, sports, and artistic exchanges, which had very promising results during Obama's terms, were extremely limited. And I would also like to remind you that during Trump's administration, there were more entities that were restricted from operating in the market. For instance, 231 companies linked to retail trade, all hotels, some in the financial sector, closure of the formal channels for sending remittances. suspension of private charter flights to the entire country, except to Havana, which were limited, prohibition since 2019 of cruise ship arrivals, suspension of the family reunification program, and the cessation of consular services in Cuba. Additionally, various local development experiences and undertakings affected, especially in the non-state sector, which in 2020 grew some 600,000 people, 30% of the working population, which led to a drastic drop in their levels of activity. All these actions have obstacled our efforts to tackle the pandemic barriers for access to medical technologies with more than 10% of components coming from the US and for obtaining more than 30 products and inputs required for sanitary protocols for COVID-19. Access to fastest and most expeditious logistical transport routes is impeded, increasing in transportation costs. And these have meant obstacles to financial operations with suppliers of inputs and to the execution of donations. This has affected the production of the five Cuban vaccine candidates. In spite of this, they have continued their process of approval, but the impact was severe and led to uh, the price of supplies between 50% and 60%. The effects of the health sector amounted to $198.3 million between April and December 2020. And in 2020, there was also a fall in Cuban GDP by 11%. The campaign to discredit Cuba's medical cooperation with other countries, including that offered to face a pandemic, 57 medical brigades in 40 countries. In total, this medical cooperation has included some 400,000 health collaborators within 65 years have carried out missions in 164 countries. And we are going to see these attacks in the Americas, the affectations to the bilateral agreements signed by Cuba with several countries in the Americas between 2019 and 2020. Only in those 2 years, they have seriously harmed the health care of 67 million people, which undermines the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. And it is important to say that the cooperation that Cuba offers in education and health not only respond to the immediate needs of the countries, but they also contribute to improving the response capabilities of those countries in the climate crisis. And let's remember also that public health is one of the sectors that has been most severely impacted by climate change. We see also how other sectors have been impacted, for instance, agriculture sector, telecommunications, cost of connectivity, barriers to access to virtual platforms. If we take into consideration colonizations of American entities, we see that between 2017 and 2020, these penalties to US entities and those of other countries for alleged violations of the blockade amounted to $3.7 million. And thus systematical harassment against all kinds of operations have intensified. And of course, this is a policy that has been rejected by the international community. The last voting in the UN, where 184 countries voted against the blockade and only two in favor, Israel and United States, and three abstentions. And there have been caravans of international solidarity with Cuba, and Cuba's willingness is always there for a respectful dialogue with the United States, but they have ignored this willingness. Now, addressing climate change in Cuba, we are going to see a series of actions that have been affected, and we see how this, as the blockade intensifies, we have applied a natural resources and environment plan, and this has to do with environment and natural resources. And this is a strategic axis which main objective is to respond, to provide actions to the effect of climate change and other disasters. This is a strategic axis. It is transversal to the strategic sectors identified in the country until 2030, and it is linked to the national implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Development and the Sustainable Development Goals. It includes important technological and financial requirements. As Diego and Claudia said, for all developing countries, this is a requirement. And these are the most impacted sectors affected by the US blockade. For us to face climate change is of the essence in order to implement all the SDGs, and if this affectation continues, some of the goals could be compromised. Cuba reiterated its national commitment towards global efforts to fight climate change and the highest political level willingness to act. And it ratifies its willingness to enlarge cooperation with other countries and the enlargement of its response capabilities. And we identified the severe impact of the United States, and we ratified the common but shared but differentiated principles which have been addressed by Diego and Claudia, and we reiterated that we will need economic resources, transfer technology, and capacity building, which developed countries must incrementally contribute in accordance with their obligations established in the Framework Convention and the Paris Agreement. And in the Constitution we approved in 2019, we incorporated the subject, as well as in the Tarea Vida State Plan, which was approved in 2017. Now, this plan named Tarea Vida, it's a plan that includes all our territory where the temporal scales considers a progressive investment program in short, medium, and long, and very long term, and tasks that have to do with the vulnerability, adaptation, mitigation, and the basis of all this is the studies of vulnerability in coastal zones and several um, regions of the country, which serve as a basis to assess the situation. Vulnerability and adaptation in Cuba are key factors, and for us, adaptation is a priority now that the Cuban weather is going from a tropical wet weather to dry weather, and we have seen the negative impacts of climate change and the different, ever since the assessment of these indicators, we have seen a rise in temperature, a rise in sea level, also expectation of the water availability, also an impact on the rain, the season, droughts, among others. And then in terms of mitigation, for the first time, we included the concept of less intensive development. And this plan gives priority to mitigation in sectors such as energy and agriculture. Among the proposals of mitigation, we include also more participation of renewable energy in the power generation, as well as more efficiency and other proposals regarding transport, also more industry activities by 2030 and investment as well in the agriculture sector, particularly in uh, uh, agriculture. And here we can see how the blockade has impacted the electricity sector. We have seen how it has been difficult to replace equipment And due to the intensification of the blockade, only this subject we have seen that the 300 gigawatt hours saved equivalent to 95,000 tons of fuel just because of the impact in the electricity sector. For us, uh, cooperation in the face of climate change is a priority. The Capacity Building Center for Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change Adaptation, technical assistance in the preparation of national communications, and the updating of reports of climate vision and the climate modeling and projection, conduct of implementation of hazard, vulnerability, and risk studies, and most assessments on coastal zones. And as part of this blockade, we see that there have been untapped spaces for environmental cooperation. When the diplomatic relationships were established, a number of MOUs were signed for natural disaster management and adaptation, mitigation, protection of biodiversity, and also possible spaces for international cooperation in areas such as the capacity building, technology transfer, funding, and joint research. All in summary, we have that the impact of the blockade on Cuba's response, well, the blockade is the main obstacle to achieving greater progress in tackling climate change and for the country's development. It has prevented the country from accessing the knowledges, equipment, and scientific and technical knowledge required for its sustainable development. And as we can see, all this endeavors require technology financing, and we see ever increasing limitations internationally wise in order to conduct those actions and to comply by the goals, the more ambitious goals. It affects disaster risk management and international aid. Both central and local government actions, as well as a complementary international cooperation, have been affected. And it constitutes the main obstacle for the implementation of the Social and Economic National Plan 2030 for the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs, and to the task Vida plan and for the implementation of the national determined contributions. The Some of the academia results that we have seen lately in the country that had to do with the sustainability and addressing climate change, you see that there are mentions that are very common of the blockade as and and the way in which it affects the sustainable development and the fight against climate change. And here you can see some of the biography, by the books and sources I have consulted to this presentation. So once again, thank you very much to organizers of this meeting, and it is an excellent idea to address this topic now that we are preparing the COP26 in Glasgow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ramon Pitch. He mentioned, he summarized the figures of the consequences of the blockade against Cuba. In this UCM, the blockade against Cuba is perhaps the longest and the most harmful measures. He updated us on the blockade against Cuba, the impact and how the blockade is being handled today, how it's been escalated. And in the climate change, it refers to measures taken by Cuba. Cuba is committed in the struggle against climate change, starting with the Paris Agreement, but also national taken measures. in order to mitigate, adapt, and the life task to address climate change with strategic plans, 11 tasks, identifying the impacts and describes the actions to be taken. The effect is Cuba is clear. For instance, the vulnerability in the coastal areas, the increase of cyclones affecting the island. Although Cuba has already presented its NDCs, it remains clearly affected by the blockade. The blockade is present all around the island in various fields and impedes to have access to financing, technologies, exchanges which are crucial in a field affecting the whole planet and demands cooperation. So the blockade is not affecting solely Cuba in the fight against the pandemic by restraining access to technology and inputs, but also impedes the action of the medical assistance provided by Cuba to other countries. For instance, in the electricity sector, although Cuba has clearly defined its policy in this area regarding technology and for power production to be more environmentally friendly, it cannot do it because it does not have access to that technology because of the criminal blockade against the island. And he concluded by summarizing the impacts, and that summary could be the summary of our seminar. How UCMs, blockades, harassment, bullying impede countries to fulfill with the commitments acquired on the sovereign way. The US has undermined many climate agreements, such as the Tokyo Agreement. So not only they are undermining these schemes to fight climate change, but also undermine the efforts of other countries to do the same, to fulfill these agreements. So ALBA-TCP has already a brilliant history of opposing UCMs. It has spoken in various agencies fighting these UCMs. And today's event is part of this effort of ALBA-TCP to denounce this war against multilateralism and the right of peoples to define their own destiny. It is the continuation of a roadmap that should lead us to a continued struggle to have a better world. I would like now to give the floor to our Vice Minister to Multilateral Affairs to close this event that has been endorsed by the Vice Ministry of Multilateral Affairs and the Simon Bolivar Institute for Peace and Solidarity Among the Peoples. Therefore, to close this seminar, I'm going to give the floor to Ruben Darío Molina. Thank you very much, Guillermo. Thank you to the speakers and those who have accompanied us in the translation of the seminar, and those who have joined us, Secretary General Llorenti, who is also accompanying us. I think we have fulfilled a major objective mandated by our heads since they tasked us, given this global agenda, and in the framework of the coming COP26 meeting to be held in Glasgow, in Scotland, the task to address climate change. The presentations complement each other. There have been some differences in our positions within ALBA-TCP. However, that is not the essence. There are differences, however, there are much more common ground. And this is a good preamble to what is coming. Delegates are have started to arrive, have started to arrive in Scotland. Mrs. De Carlo, our representative, is arriving there, as well as other representative of the ALBA-TCP countries. So we still have a long path ahead. And there is a challenge, namely increasing participation of organized peoples in this process. Bolivia, after Copenhagen, I remember they held an international meeting, international conference. And this year, they also organized an international conference on the protection of Mother Earth. Some of the issues that were debated today are a continuation of our coherent struggle. We remain very firm on the need to have organized people participating in this process among the various areas of scientific, academic, and popular participation. We remain strong in our positions and we continue defending participation. This event has been very successful. I hope that in the near future we're going to organize other successful events and we can even discuss some of the elements of the negotiations in Glasgow and remain with the slogan of Copenhagen mentioned by Chavez and others. We need to save the planet. We need to save humanity. We cannot save capitalism, but we need to save humanity. Thank you very much.